muted to pay attention to that.
Okay, we are live.
Welcome everybody to the first Delta Independent Science Board meeting of 2024. I now call the meeting to order. Let me first provide an overview of the public comment process. So we take written questions and comments during our meetings, and please follow the instructions that will soon be up on your screen or in the meeting notice for details. There's an email address. You can raise your hand in the chat and various other options. So if we could get that showing. Seems like they're having some technical difficulties with that, but so the email address is the same one you would use to contact the Delta Independent Science Board. Why don't I turn it over? Well, no, first we need to do roll call. So let's just first start with our roll call, and then we'll give further information on that in a minute. Okay, Tanya.
Tanya Heikela, no new declarations.
Tom.
Just trying to unmute here. Tom Holzer, no new declarations.
Anna.
Anna McCulloch, no new declarations.
Diane.
Diane McKnight, no new declarations.
Bob.
Bob Nyman, I have one new declaration. I probably should have done it earlier, but I thought it was more of an honorific appointment. But it's with a program called One Water, which is a national program in France, trying to link all of their various research institutions, as well as the public, having to do with all aspects of water at a national level. And the reason I'm declaring it now is I thought it was really just being a science advisor for them was not going to take a lot of time, but it ends up that they are going to require at least a few meetings a year. So we'll see how it goes. Anyway, thank you.
Thanks, Bob. Obey.
Yes, I may have one also. I'm not sure if I mentioned this earlier. I've been appointed as a member of the executive committee on adaptation to a changing climate of the American Society of Civil Engineers. So just started this a few months ago. That's all.
Sounds great. Okay, Kenny.
Hi, so I'm a new member. This is my first meeting, and I don't know if this is the introduction time or that comes later.
That's going to come later, Kenny. Just for now, you say your name and whether you have any conflicts of interest or declarations.
Yeah, so one that is important is I'm part of the review panel for the LTO biological effects. And that was started before I joined the ISB and then got delayed. And so I'm in the middle of it now. The only other thing is also a member of the Independent Science Advisory Board for the Columbia River.
Okay. And LTO stands for?
I don't know.
Okay, all right, we'll get the
LTL is the
Long-term operations.
long-term
Okay.
operations. It's the new, I'm looking at the biological assessment being prepared by Bureau of Reclamation.
Okay, very good. That doesn't sound like that should be a problem. The main, well, we'll talk about it later. Okay, Inga.
One new declaration, Inga Werner. I have one new declaration. I agreed to serve on the Scientific Advisory Committee for a project on contaminant and toxicity monitoring at the Federal Institute of Hydrology in Koblenz, Germany. That's it.
Okay, great. And I'm Lisa Wanger, no new declarations. All right, so at this point, because we do have an in-person places, I'm going to turn it over to Kyra Wallace, who will talk about details for those in-person folks.
Great, thanks, Lisa. Yeah, for those of you that are in person at our meeting place in Sacramento, in the event of an evacuation at the resources building. Everyone must remain calm, take all of your belongings, and proceed to the nearest exit of the building. Staff will be gathering at the evacuation point, which is 1615 9th Street. And the public is welcome to join at that evacuation point. And the code for the restrooms is on the whiteboard in the back of the room. And that's all for housekeeping.
Thank you, Kyra. And because we didn't give the exact instructions on public participation, I was just looking for that really quick. So you can email at disb@deltacouncil.ca.gov. You can raise your hand in the chat, or otherwise contact Edmund to be able to provide comments. Okay, there we go. There's a slide now. Okay, all right, let's move on. Just a quick overview of the agenda. We are going to take potential actions on next steps for submitting comments to the State Water Resources Control Board on the staff report for the Bay Delta Plan update. Another big part of the agenda is to discuss the final environmental impact report that was just released by the California Department of Water Resources for the Delta Conveyance Project. And we're going to discuss potentially drafting a memo on how well Delta ISB comments were addressed. Then we're going to discuss other ongoing reviews to help inform the annual work plan that is coming up soon as a requirement. And so I'll just start. Are there any public comments on this part of the agenda, Edmund? We can stop sharing this slide. I think it's not coming across well on my screen. Okay. So, all right. So moving on, agenda item number 2, I'll give my chair's report and some business matters. So Dr. C. Brandt ended his second term on the Delta ISB on January 14th, and Dr. Rose started on January 15th. So I'm just going to take a minute here to acknowledge Steve, and Kenny, this is when you will introduce yourself when I turn it over to you in a minute. We've said many great things about Steve when he stepped down as chair, when at other venues. So I'm going to keep this relatively brief, but I do really want to acknowledge that Steve has been a fearless leader of this board for many years, and he will be sorely missed. His recent work leading the upper trophic level food web review is just one example of the kind of deep attention that he has given to important science topics relevant to the Delta management. And, not to be forgotten is that he was instrumental in keeping the board going during the difficult times when funding was taken away, but he ultimately played a big role in securing a stronger footing for the board by demonstrating our broad support for this independent science that we bring to the science enterprise here. So we will miss Steve, and we welcome Dr. Kenny Rose, who I know because he's from my institution, and I know he's going to be a great addition to the board. So Dr. Rose, please at this time give us a brief introduction.
Sure. So I'm Kenny Rose. I'm at Horn Point Lab, which is a sister lab to where Lisa is at Chesapeake Biological Lab. I was actually a member of the board when it started all those years ago, and I've been active in a lot of advisory panels and boards throughout those years on and off in the Delta. I'm presently the Franz Merrick Professor in Sustainable Ecosystem Restoration, which is a mouthful, at Horn Point. Before that, I was at Louisiana State University for 19 years, and I was a associate dean when I left. And before that, I spent 12 years at Oak Ridge National Lab in Tennessee. And I am some call me a desktop oceanographer. I don't get wet. I do all kinds of computer modeling and mathematical modeling of populations, communities, food webs. And my background is from University of Washington in quantitative fisheries. So I was trained in stock assessment, but I'm not a practitioner of it. And I am excited to be on the group again. It's interesting. I'm really curious what issues have come around again and what have been resolved and what are the new ones. And so I think that'll be very interesting, and hopefully I can help in particular with things that involve fish. And that is what I've focused a lot on, habitat, population dynamics, stressor effects, multiple stressors, climate change. And hopefully that that will help the group go forward.
Well, thanks, Kenny. It is great that you bring that institutional knowledge. I hope you'll let us know when you're seeing some of the same issues again. I think you're going to recognize an issue later on in our discussion. Okay, so moving on, we'll get to know Kenny more and more as time goes on, but we're very happy to have him joining the board. So the next item that I need to update you on is that the Delta Lead Scientist interview panel met in October. I have told you this before, and decided to move forward with interviews with 2 of the 4 candidates. And so interviews have now been set for February 22nd and March 11th. So these are all-day events that include a public seminar, an opportunity for ISB members to meet the candidate and get to know that person and discuss opportunities to work together. So that is coming up, and you'll have more information on that soon. Next, we will be presenting an update to the council at their January meeting, and this meeting is an opportunity to firm up some details of the draft work plan. So that we need to discuss, when some of the reviews will be due, when people think they're going to make progress on other activities. So our last council update was in September of 2023. And for 2024, we know we have these 3 thematic reviews that we're trying to complete. And we also, I think it's nice, rather than giving the council just a huge laundry list of everything we've been up to this year, I think it's really nice if we can think about what are some of our biggest accomplishments, things that in particular would resonate with these folks that are out there on the front lines with the public. What has the ISB done for them? So I'll take any comments from anyone about what they think our biggest accomplishments have been. I don't know if folks want to do this cold. We can also discuss this later, but it's a tough question to answer quickly. Diane.
Well, I want to say that pulling off these 2 very successful workshops where they were well organized, well attended, real valuable discussions, as someone who was involved in both of them, that's really just execution of those workshops was terrific. And I want to hands off to Lillian and Christine and Edmund and all of the hard work that went into that.
Thank you, Diane. So true. Tom.
Yeah, Diane sort of stole my thunder, but I wanted to emphasize with the managing subsided lands workshop that it was a very good mix of actually agency heads and scientists. And I think it provided an opportunity for them to actually get together in one place and talk about issues. Something that I think that coordination has been a challenge for them. So I think that workshop really reached out to a broader community than our usual efforts did.
Thanks, Tom. That's great. Bob?
I agree with Diane and Tom for sure. No problem there whatsoever. But I think this is a great opportunity to highlight the fact that we've had 2 very productive and engaged postdocs involved with our activities. And I'm not sure that there's any guarantee that that program is going to continue or not, or at least support for postdocs going forward. But they've been such a valuable addition to everything that we've done. I think that deserves some, bringing it to the attention of the board for sure, and hopefully garnering some support for continuing such an activity. And then, of course, then I think the other couple of things that we could highlight in passing is the fact that we've reviewed, the conveyance project, the environmental flows, or the voluntary agreements for environmental flows and so forth. And I think each and every one of those has had some impact. It's probably from your perspective, Lisa, and maybe others that here that, we could highlight just one or two of those that have had the most impact, where the agencies have really responded in a good way. So we kind of leave that part up to you. But anyway, I think highlighting the postdocs would really be an important item to bring up with the board.
Thanks, Bob. That's great perspective. And, I know there are also interactions that individual board members have, sometimes as part of their board activities, sometimes as part of other activities. So it may not rise to the level of what we highlight during the council meeting, but I do think, particularly I know what Tanya and I have been doing to try to mentor some of the social science staff and help bring social sciences a little more to the forefront of activities within the science enterprise. And I think, we really saw some great successes. I'm not going to take credit, really. I think Jess Rudnick and Rachel Klopfenstein and others have really been pushing it forward, but we've tried to help in the background. And so I think that's another big accomplishment, because I think we are seeing more engagement on the social science side in a more meaningful way, rather than deepening people's understanding of what social science research looks like and what it can contribute to management. So Inga, what would you like to add?
Yeah, I think the efforts to educate the public and us about deep uncertainty and approaches to dealing with that are also worth mentioning. I think it's ongoing, but it's also an important topic and very foreign to many people, so it's a good thing to think about.
Yeah, thanks. It's hard to know the impact yet with our products still rolling out, but I do think these seminars have generated some pretty interesting discussions. So I appreciate that comment. Okay, well, that's very helpful. Thanks. I think we just did come up with the laundry list, but that's okay. I think those were all good points, and I'm going to see if we can work those in. Okay, now next. The next very important agenda item, near and dear to Inga and my hearts, are we need to elect a new chair-elect this year. So on September 1st, Inga Warner will become the chair. I will move into what Steve always called the coveted past chair position. And so that means we need the next person in the management chain to step forward. If you're interested in serving in the chairship, please let staff know. And we'd like that position to begin September 1st. Of this year. So please consider if that's within your schedule. I think anyone is eligible to take that position, and it really is very valuable to have this experience of working more with the managers and the interested parties that we advise. It gives you a great perspective on why the board is here and its value to the community. So I really think it is a nice thing to rotate that around and give everyone that perspective. Okay, I won't make anyone volunteer now, but please consider it. Okay, second to last item in my briefing. The other big news is that Christine Kabugua, this is her last official meeting. She won't wrap up her postdoc until February, but she just won't be able to make the February meeting. She has now accepted a job at the Nature Conservancy, but luckily we've arranged for her to come back in March to provide some update on her research, since she wasn't going to be able to make it to the February meeting. I'll turn it open to the board in just a sec to get comments, but I just want to acknowledge, what a great research partner Christina's been. She's been instrumental to all of the ongoing reviews, but I'm sure Tom's going to talk a little bit about her contributions to subsidence. But I do think I just really admire that she's shown remarkable dedication, skill, and good humor about the diverse requests that we have given her, because many of these things were outside of her expertise, and she just never hesitated to jump in. And so I just think she's been so valuable for having that perspective. Tom, what would you like to add?
Oh, I just want to give the strongest kudos I can to Christine. I was so impressed by the way she jumped in. Behind the scenes, she really made the subsidence review work. I mean, she was organizing And it was a real challenge to bring together all the panels that we had because there was so much diversity. And in some cases, we didn't know initially who was the appropriate person. So we had to do a lot of research on just even staffing the workshop. And Christine took on most of the responsibility for that. And she was always enthusiastic and eager to take on work. So I'm at this point, I'm not sure how we're going to finish the report because she has been so instrumental in our logistics, and hopefully she'll continue to be involved because I think it's important for particularly the PhDs to get something like a professional paper out of it. And I think we'll be able to do that. And I hope Christine is going to be able to add that to her resume. But she certainly took the leadership for us, and it was a joy working with her. And I look forward to at least working with her a little bit as we wrap up the review.
Yeah, we do still have her through February, but yes, great. Thank you, Tom. Bob.
Well, I don't think I can add anything more or better to, what Tom has said about Christine. She's been an absolute joy to work with, and yes, just the best, just absolutely the best. And I hope that she won't be a stranger to us, that we will be able to see her from time to time in the coming months, and if not longer. And just wish her the very best. She's got a great career ahead of her, and whatever we can do to help her along the way, just let us know. So thank you, Christine.
Thanks, Bob. Tanya?
Yeah, I just want to echo what everybody has already said about Christine. Sad that we won't get to see you at the February meeting, Christine, but you have been instrumental in really keeping so much of our work going over the last couple of years, and you approach everything with intellectual humility and curiosity and enthusiasm, and those are skills that'll serve you well in any career. So good luck, and we'll keep pestering you for at least a month, but you're very much appreciated.
Thanks, Tanya. Diane?
Well, I echo what others have said, and there's been comments about how, Christine, you've been so successful working outside your area of expertise, but you have also been very successful working on the session 2, the biogeochemistry of the subsidence issue for the Delta. And there's, a lot there that could be synthesized down the road. And I just want to put it out there that, as you were saying, Lisa, about opportunities for professional advancement by writing a paper, there's a lot in that session that hasn't been synthesized. We didn't find a 10-page paper that put all that together. So I just want to put that in your mind as we try to finish this report. So this is my opportunity.
Thanks, Diane. I think that is already in her mind. So she does have an independent research project that she will tell us hopefully a little bit about in March. And I'm sure she'd love your input and feedback. So, Ove.
I couldn't pass up this opportunity to echo what everybody has said regarding Christine's contribution. I want to highlight how pleasant she has been. I'm a relatively newcomer, but for anything I would need, she would always come up with ideas and suggestions in a very pleasant way. I really enjoyed interacting with her, like all the other postdocs and other staff members. Thank you, Christine.
Yes, so true, Ove. We've been very lucky with the kind of folks that work with us, just wonderful partners. So yes, special thanks to Christine. So thank you. Okay, we'll move on now to the final part of my briefing. So since the last public meeting, we've received one piece of public correspondence, which is in your meeting package, and it was from Bob Wright saying that urgent request for adequate time to review the Delta Conveyance Project final EIR And the copy to the board was sent, the main letter was sent to DWR and a courtesy copy to the ISB. And we thank Bob Wright for sharing that with us. As everyone knows, the EIR has been certified at this point, but we'll be discussing, what we want to do in terms of comments. At this point, Edmund, are there any public comments on this part of the agenda?
There are none.
Great. Okay, we're going to move on to agenda item 3 then, which is a presentation. So you may not have been expecting this, but we have a very interesting presentation ahead of us, a review and recommendations of Bifenthrin mixtures in the Sacramento. Nope, nobody warned me. I was going to have to pronounce that. San Joaquin Delta for a changing future. And we're lucky to have with us today Eduardo Martinez from California Sea Grant. He's a state fellow with the Collaborative Science and Peer Review Unit in the Delta Science Program. And he's going to present results from his review to address gaps in Bifenthrin research and management, along with recommendations to address those gaps. So this is a synthetic pyrethroid heavily used in urban and agricultural areas for pest management. And it's frequently detected and it's known to affect sensitive aquatic species. So we're very interested to hear what he has to say. So thank you, Eduardo.
Yes, thank you for having me. Hello everyone. My name is Eduardo Martinez. I am a 2023 California Sea Grant State Fellow with the Delta Science Program. Today I will present this independent project, which was completed as part of my fellowship. It is titled Review and Recommendations of Bifenthrin Mixtures in the Sacramento San Joaquin Delta for a Changing Future. Next slide, please. Here's today's agenda. I'll first go over a bit of background on what Bifenthrin is, its effects on aquatic organisms, then discuss some research and management gaps. That will lead us into recommendations that address those gaps, and finally present my conclusions and next steps. Next slide, please.
Hang on, I'm sorry, Eduardo, to interrupt you.
Sure.
For those of us online, the slides are oversized. Can we get them shrunk a little bit so we can see the whole slide?
It looks fine on my end, Lisa. I wonder.
Oh, is it just me? Okay, thanks. I'll work on my end then. Sorry to interrupt.
No worries.
Well, actually, they're oversized on my end too. I can only see part of the slide.
I will try to resize as we go, but bear with me.
Looks fine here.
It's fine here too for me.
Yeah, can I just ask AGP really quick? Are you guys doing a display view? Is the display all right on your end when you're broadcasting?
So everyone here is a panelist, so they'll be able to adjust the screen if you hover next to where everybody's video is showing up. There's these 2 vertical lines and you can adjust the size of the screen from there. If you hover over it, a gray line will appear and you'll be able to see 2 arrows facing left and right. So you can adjust it that way to make it as big or small as you want, but besides that, there's too much that I could do on this side.
Okay.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Sorry again, Eduardo. You can resume.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. Bifenthrin is a pesticide of the pyrethroid class. It is used for pest management in urban and agricultural sectors, particularly for ants, mosquitoes, and ticks. In California, Bifenthrin is used in the agricultural sector in the almond farms for navel orange worm management. And for some context, almonds are California's most valuable export crop. Bifenthrin is also used to treat lawns and used in agricultural and structural projects in urban areas. And Bifenthrin is relatively insoluble and has a high affinity for binding onto soils and sediments. And as a result, it is frequently detected in delta waters and soils. Additionally, Bayesian relative risk models, Bifenthrin is a compound with the highest risk factors for fish mortality. This was identified by work by Dr. Landis's group. And with this project, I sought to leverage my background in chemical transport and nutrient cycling to further explore Bifenthrin's impact on the delta and possible solutions. Next slide. The map you see here illustrates the extent of bifenthrin usage in the country. When we focus on California, we see that there is a significant amount throughout Northern California and the Central Valley. And on the right side is this list provided by the State Water Board where locations where bifenthrin has been detected in the Delta waterways. Some of those examples include Cache Slough, French Camp Slough, Marsh Creek, Eulatus Creek, and Victoria Canal. Next, please. This work supports the efforts outlined in the 2018 Delta ISB Water Quality Science in the Sacramento San Joaquin Delta Report and the 2022 to 2026 Science Action Agenda, as well as efforts discussed in the pyrethroid research plan. Next, please. So the goal of this project is to identify and evaluate approaches that can be used to reduce bifenthrin concentrations in the Delta to ultimately reduce the risk caused by bifenthrin to the Delta's native species that are already exposed to several contaminants. And we do understand that reducing bifenthrin concentrations is a large undertaking, and there are alternatives that are much more hazardous. Next, please. So the methods that I used for this project include looking into 37 references, which include peer-reviewed papers from 2015 to 2023, and papers that and those that include bifenthrin plus a secondary compound with a synergistic effect. I also looked into documents from public agencies that discussed bifenthrin detection, control, and management, such as the Central Valley Regional Water Quality Control Board's 2023 Addressed Pyrethroid Research Plan. I also looked into papers tying adaptive management to contaminants. And lastly, I met with 3 IEP contaminant project work team members, and I asked questions such as, what are current research limitations? Is there enough data, and how is that data being used? And are there any contaminant mixtures that require immediate attention? How do we address those secondary compounds that increase the lethal effects of bifenthrin, given that some of these secondary compounds are also both anthropogenic, for example, fipronil, which is another pesticide, and naturally occurring compounds such as metal oxides. Next slide. First, I will highlight the effects on aquatic organisms. The image on the left synthesizes a bit of information on the effect of 2 Delta species, particularly the inland silverside and the Delta smelt. Both studies have revealed that salinity increases the mortality and impacts fish behavior when bifenthrin is present. And on the right side, we have a short list of additional references focused on the mortality and effects of bifenthrin and secondary compounds on aquatic organisms. There are also more references included in the report that I have written for your consideration. Next slide, please. So this is an outline of the gaps that are identified throughout the project. These include water quality monitoring data gaps, specifically data on the temporal and spatial distribution of bifenthrin, fade and transport, especially after first flush and severe drought events, and unimplemented water quality strategies developed by other agencies. I also address some management practice gaps, which include differing priorities in water users of the Delta, differing pesticide sources, such as point and non-point, and no management plan for pyrethroid control in the Delta. And last, I briefly address some of the effects on climate change and how stressors caused by climate change can affect bifenthrin. For example, those related to temperature and salinity. Next slide. Next, I will be talking about the recommendations to address some of those gaps. In the next following slides, I include the use and/or implementation of some of these items, comprehensive monitoring and assessment strategy, adaptive management, a structured decision framework, and mitigation strategies. Next slide. So in this slide, we have 3 techniques which I believe should be implemented simultaneously to further our knowledge on the contaminants in the Delta, and I'll go over a few pros listed in the figure. First, we should increase the discrete sampling frequency. Several studies have only been performed over short periods of time. Some of the pros associated with this technique is that it is low cost and analysis can be done quickly. Second, the use of water quality and transport models. These can capture long-term contamination trends and are useful to make predictions. And thirdly, use continuous sample monitoring strategies and put these into place, as they can capture long spatial resolution and are relatively low cost. Next slide. The next recommendation is adaptive management. The Delta ISB has expressed interest in the development of an adaptive management strategy and linking management needs to research. Adaptive management strategies have been described previously for mercury in the Delta, and adaptive management strategies for nutrient contamination has been considered in other water systems for nutrients throughout the country. Also, adaptive management is tied into structured decision framework. I took the initiative of adapting a nitrate adaptive management plan to a structured decision framework for Bifenthrin. Next slide. As I mentioned, I tailored an adaptive management strategy into a structured decision framework for Bifenthrin. It is not necessary to read this table. I will go over a few rows in the next couple of slides to give examples of what a strategy can look like. For context, this strategy was developed originally for an adaptive management for nitrate in an Australian water system. Next slide, please. So to describe this table, the first category in the system is system understanding. This refers to the interdisciplinary areas that are required to fully characterize the impact of Bifenthrin on the Delta. I split these into two elements, physical and social, and I will only talk about the physical element as an example for this presentation. And the management objectives were developed with interlinked management actions that meet the objectives, and finally an aspirational target to work towards meeting. In this example, I suggest to tie in water quality monitoring into a strategic decision framework to characterize water quality in the Delta and to improve water quality assurance. This action would require managers to conduct a watershed inventory by collecting data and evaluate existing data to prioritize and identify critical action areas. Lastly, this will lead into a comprehensive database for contaminants. Next slide, please. Another example from the chart is to anticipate change, and one of the elements for that is scenarios that may impact the progress set by agencies. The management objective here is to be aware of changes associated with climate change, bureaucratic, technical, practical, and experimental knowledge, and financial security. The management action here is to build nimble decision making to allow for unanticipated scenarios. The target for this segment is to identify the most likely alternatives with room for adaptation. Next slide, please. And the last bit of recommendations, here I have separated into two sections. The first will involve environmental remediation, which we recommend to implement technologies and systems that can remove Bifenthrin. Previous studies have shown that filter strips and constructed wetlands are effective methods to remove Bifenthrin from agricultural runoff. I'd also like to add that these systems are capable of removing other types of contaminants as well. And second is source control and education. The first area of reducing contaminants in the Delta begins at the source and at the consumer level. Educating our communities of these impacts can reduce Bifenthrin loading in Delta waters. Given that Bifenthrin by individual consumers is also a significant source, being mindful of the effects that Bifenthrin has on our ecosystem will help influence how Bifenthrin and other contaminants are used in the future. There are several strategies outlined by the Central Coast Water Quality Control Board that summarize the benefits of using source control for pyrethroids that is linked in the report. Finally, next slide, please. Next. Finally, I'd like to leave you with a few key takeaways. We suggest the implementation of a comprehensive monitoring strategy, a structured decision framework, an adaptive management strategy, and to investigate the potential effects of climate change. Next. Next is to prioritize bifenthrin concentration reduction, given that it is one of the most frequently detected compounds and a contaminant with a high lethal risk for fish in the Delta. Next. And these recommendations provided in this document support the effects of the Science Action Agenda and the Independent Science Board's Water Quality Report. I hope that this document and others, such as the pyrethroid research plan and the Science Action Agenda, can be used to build on the methods for improving water quality on the Delta and focus on bifenthrin. Next slide, please. The link to my report is here and can be accessed through ResearchGate. I finished my fellowship on January 31st, and I hope to leverage the experience that I have gained here in the Delta Science program and in the collaborative science and peer review unit. I will begin a PhD program at UNLV in the Geosciences department looking at phosphate isotope chemistry. And next slide, please. That is all. So thank you all for listening and allowing me to present. I can answer any questions that you may have at this moment.
Thank you, Eduardo. Just a quick scoping question here. Are you now done with this project, or could we give you meaningful feedback that would be used in this project?
Since I finished my fellowship, I think the feedback, I'd ideally like to receive feedback, but I don't know how much effort I can put into this at this moment. But
Right.
I mean, we can
maybe
further.
we'll have some comments that would inform what you do in your future research or something. So yeah,
Sure.
You're already moving on to your PhD program, but I just want to give the board that context that we're not here to just describe how he could improve this particular study. Okay,
Yeah.
Bob, go ahead.
Did you say,
Well,
Tom?
it's a great presentation, Eduardo. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
I may have missed it, but it wasn't clear to me, or I don't know how long the chemical actually persists in the environment. That's my first question. Could you say a few words about that, about how long it might last once it's actually in a water environment?
Yeah. I believe it has a half-life of about a year. I can get back to you on that number, but yeah, it persists and it decomposes into several other constituents. But also there's research that that reveals that it has a high affinity towards binding into soils, so it can persist that way for longer periods of time.
Okay, great. I would like to know a little bit more about that. I can look it up myself. But my second question and last question is, do you have any idea how many metric tons of active ingredients of this chemical are actually applied in the Delta each year?
I don't have that number. There is a tool that's listed in the report that has the usage in from agricultural areas, but I think that number is can change given that bifenthrin is easily accessible and sometimes it's not reported, for example, by individual consumers.
No. Okay. All right. Great. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. Tom.
Eduardo, nice talk. My question has to do with the almond growers. Yeah, that's of course a very big crop in California, and you have a lot of agricultural interests planting those. So it's their first time dealing with bifenthrin. And my question is, how sensitive are the almond growers to the impact of that particular chemical?
Yeah, I'm not too sure about that. I didn't do a lot of reading into that, but yeah, I don't really have a clear answer for you. I think that you know, one of the things that I tried to do with this project is to kind of make it so this like monitoring strategy and this structured decision framework can be adapted to other contaminants. And I know that bifenthrin, replacing bifenthrin is kind of would be really hard to do. It's one of the least hazardous or lethal pesticides. So I think there might be a lot of things to consider to use an alternative. But yeah, I can't really say much to the almond users or the almond growers.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Tanya.
Yeah, thanks, Eduardo, for your talk. It was really informative, and I appreciate all the great recommendations that align with a lot of the work we do as the ISB. When you were talking about, I think it was some of the gaps in the literature or around water quality monitoring gaps, you mentioned unimplemented water quality strategies.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? That word struck me. I was like, oh, what are those?
Yeah, I looked into documents provided by the state water boards, and they do have like a pyrethroid research plan. There was one published in 2005 and another published in 2010, or an update to the 2005, and they do describe the pyrethroid and monitoring strategies. They do outline and draft a kind of a plan. However, one of the obstacles that is mentioned in those papers is that there's a lack of funding, a lack of being able to hire people to implement those strategies. But yeah, so for example, there's already some type of strategy in place, but it's yeah, a lack of funding, a lack of resources is one of the limitations that they have.
Thank you. And congrats on your starting your PhD program.
Thank you.
Yeah, that is interesting. Maybe a topic to take up. Diane, where did you go? I'm going to go to Inga while we wait.
Okay,
Diane had to take a call. Okay, go ahead, Inga.
Thanks for that, Eduardo. That was very interesting. I just wanted to quickly point out that we reviewed a pyrethroid management plan, or I can't remember what it was called, last year, but that one was published by the Central Valley Regional Board. So I don't know if you've seen that. Anyway, my question is more, what is your sense of how good our monitoring data is? Do we have a pretty good idea of what the hotspots are? And wouldn't it be, in the interest of resource management, wouldn't it be better to actually try to implement some of the remediation and source control measures, which would probably also help with other associated contaminants, not just bifenthrin. So that was a lot. So give you a bit.
Yeah. Yeah. So for example, one of the based on Dr. Landis's work, one of the areas with his Bayesian risk monitoring assessment essentially identified some key areas where bifenthrin is or I guess the effects of bifenthrin plus secondary contaminants are seen are in the confluence of the delta. That was an area that was high in his results. But sorry, there was a second part to your question that, could you repeat?
Couldn't we just jump to the remediation and source control measures in the areas we know are problematic?
Yeah, so there's a document that I read that focuses on the Salinas. No, I apologize. Let me just look at. I have it written here. It is the Central Coast Water Quality Control Board, who there's a lot of techniques that can be used for remediation. They do outline techniques such as constructed wetlands, which are effective in reducing like bifenthrin. They can also handle like phosphate or like nutrient loading, and other compounds that have high affinity towards sediments. So controlling that, you know, in a constructed wetland could be easier, or it can prevent from bifenthrin reaching waters further down the stream and affecting the sensitive fish species.
Okay. Yeah, so I think the fundamental question really underlying that needs to be answered first. Do we have good enough data to really focus in on problematic areas, right? So
yeah, and I think I discuss a little more about that in the report. So yeah.
yeah.
Great. Well, hopefully you'll share that report with us, Eduardo, or
Yes.
someone will get that.
Yeah, I meant
Diane.
to share the report of it.
Yeah, sure, Diane.
I apologize for stepping away. I thank you very much for your presentation, and this is more of a comment. It's important, in my opinion, to point out how low these concentrations are that are of concern. We're talking nanograms per liter, not micrograms per liter. So that is a fundamental aspect of the challenge, that these low concentrations are of a concern in terms of fish populations and other aquatic organisms. So that makes the challenge even more difficult to address.
Yeah. Yeah, some of the literature that I read was in the nanograms per liter.
Yeah, important perspective. Yeah, this is an area we're thinking of looking at more in the future. So this will be a very helpful report. So we do appreciate you bringing this to us, and we wish you the best of luck in your PhD program. Maybe we'll get a report out from you on that work after a while.
Yeah.
So thank you, Eduardo. I think we'll check now to see if there are any public comments on this.
There are none.
Okay, quiet today. So, well, thank you, Eduardo. We'll move on to our next agenda item
Thank you.
as soon as I pull up the right file. Okay. Okay, folks, we have our first discussion now. Agenda item 4. This is to discuss the Sacramento Delta update to the Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan. We talked about this in our last meeting, and so we're here now to see if we can finalize this letter that we've drafted. So the State Water Resources Control Board is currently considering updates to the Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan, focused on the Sacramento River and its tributaries. The Delta Eastside tributaries, including the Calaveras, Cosumnes, and Mokelumne Rivers. Interior Delta flows and Delta outflows, including consideration of proposed voluntary agreements. On September 28th, 23, the State Water Resources Control Board released a draft staff report in support of Sacramento Delta updates to the Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan for public review and comment. And the deadline for comments is January 19th, 2024, so just a couple days away. We had previously provided comments on the scientific basis report addendum that helped inform this draft report. And of course, another version of the ISB had informed the original scientific basis report. At this time, we are not planning a formal review on the draft staff report, but we have drafted a letter that re-highlights some of our past comments on the MOUs and the voluntary agreements that we thought had not yet been addressed. So we presented that draft letter at the December meeting, and we had no edits at that time from this group, no comments. So this is our opportunity to finalize that letter unless anyone has come up with something they think needs to change in that draft letter. And maybe, Edmund, do you want to maybe just share that draft letter? You all had it in your meeting packets, but just making sure we don't have any comments. I see some hands. Anna, go ahead.
Just really briefly, I took the opportunity to reread it yesterday since I hadn't read it since we had worked on it in December. And I felt that it still conveyed the main points quite well. So from my perspective, I think it's good.
Oh, that's great, Anna. Glad to hear that. Inga.
Yeah, I reread it yesterday too, and I really like the letter. Thank you so much. I noticed in the last paragraph, it startled me a bit. It sounded like that was a summarizing paragraph, and then there were some additional points in that paragraph. So that's just a formal thing, really. It's just something I noticed, and if you notice it too, you could maybe just separate it, or maybe just put in we also strongly recommend, or something little like that, but if it's just me, then don't do anything.
Is it the quick question, Inga, is it the comment about funding that is the new idea, or
no, it starts out in some, so to me that sounds, here we summarize what we've said before, and then the scientific, let me see, regardless. Yeah, so basically the highlighted sentence is something new that wasn't said before, I think. But that's the only thing I noticed.
Okay, so
scientific and community input and the mechanisms to providing sufficient funding. So that wasn't talked about before, in the letter.
Okay. I think in my mind, it was implicit, that to do some of those things well would imply that, but yeah, maybe we do say also there, just to clarify.
It's really just a very small thing. Yeah.
No, it's a good point. It's a good point. This is a new point. We're not just summarizing what we said before. I think that's accurate. So at least in explicit. Let's see, Tom, did you have a suggestion here?
Yeah, since you raised that paragraph, when I read it for the meeting, that sentence caught my eye too, and it's almost like motherhood. I don't know that it's really necessary.
Well, maybe it was just a matter of these were sort of three scientific points, but these are process points that are supported by the science. So we did talk about effective adaptive management and things like that, and we stressed the need for enough resources to make sure the adaptive management was real and that communities were effectively engaged. So I think that's really the point that's being made here, is while you're doing adaptive management, it needs to be real, and these are elements that make it real. So I do support the idea of just adding something before this sentence, and maybe we link directly back to adaptive management. We say, in addition to fully support.
Link to that, we strongly recommend, something like that, something ties it together a little bit more, maybe.
Yeah, a segue would be great. Anna, did you have a specific suggestion?
I think we're splitting hairs a little bit. To me, the first half of the sentence is sort of a meta summary of what we said before. As you said, Lisa, maybe not explicitly, but implicitly. I think it's a fair point that the call for funding is a new idea. So potentially that sentence could even be split, and the first part made more like a summary of what was before, and just the call for maybe funding or resources or some other word that is new. But again, I think we might be splitting hairs at this point.
Yeah, I think maybe, given that I mentioned adaptive management as the basis for this, we could just say to fully, in addition to fully support adaptive management, we strongly recommend. Something like that. Bob, did you have another suggestion?
No, actually, what you just said, Lisa, was what I was going to say as well. So we're thinking alike once again. And I would just like to reiterate, go on record of saying that I think this really needs to be said, and I like it as being the last sentence of our document, because the voluntary agreements will collapse. They will fail unless this is done. And so the fact that we maybe say it more than once doesn't bother me at all, because it's so vitally important. So anyway, that's all I wanted to say, and I support whatever you do, Peter.
Okay, well, let's codify that that's the amended language. Edmund, did you get that? Should we change it on the fly, or should we just amend it later?
I think as part of the action, someone can make a motion to modify the census to say, in addition to fully implement adaptive management, and then adopt the content of this letter, or just say, or you do a delegation to delegate it to you to modify as discussed today.
Okay, all right, we have our
Okay,
marching
so make a
orders.
motion for that.
Yeah, someone would need to make a motion.
Yeah.
And then I think Tanya has her hand raised too.
I was gonna make a motion. That we, that we
You can
adopt-
second
that we-
the motion.
Yeah, and second with giving Lisa the directive to just modify that sentence as discussed.
I second the motion.
Okay, so then we should go to public comments before we vote. Oh, sorry, was that a hand? No, okay. So do we have any public comments, Evan?
Or none.
Okay, so now we'll get ready for a roll call vote to either support or deny that motion. So I'm going to do a roll call vote. Tanya?
Aye.
Tom?
Aye.
Mikulak?
Aye.
I'm going to say last name, sorry, I switched. McKnight?
Aye.
Nyman?
Aye.
Obesekera?
Aye.
Rose?
Sorry, I guess I since I started yesterday, I'm going to abstain since I wasn't part of the process.
Understood. Werner?
Aye.
And Wanger votes aye. So with that, we have a unanimous passing of that suggestion, of that motion. So we will finalize that letter and send it off in time to meet the deadline. Thank you all for noticing of the problems and helping us fix them. Okay, agenda item 5. So now this is a bigger discussion, the Delta Conveyance Project Final Environmental Impact Report Review. So, as you've heard, the California Department of Water Resources released the final environmental impact report for the Delta Conveyance Project on December 8th and certified the report on December 21st, 2023. So this is an opportunity for us to consider how we want to respond to this. There's a suggestion on the table to draft a memo about how well our comments were addressed in the final EIR. There is no formal comment period, but there are many opportunities for folks to look at what we say as this thing moves through the decision process, because the environmental impact report is not the only thing that will be used for decision support. So to help people better understand what that process is, I've asked staff to give us a brief background on those next steps. So I think Edmund's going to give us that. So let's just review who might be listening to something we would say. Go ahead, Edmund.
Yeah. So even though the final EIR for the Delta Conveyance Project has been certified, DWR still has to pursue other environmental compliance and environmental permitting processes before the project could move forward. This is part of our meeting package of some of the next planning stages. I'm just going to highlight a few. So the EIS for the Delta Conveyance Project to comply with the National Environmental Policy Act has not been finalized yet. So that's something that we're still waiting for. But some of the key ones that I'll just highlight today is under California Water Code section 85088. a change in point diversion. This requires that water right holders seeking to change the conditions of their existing permits to change a point of diversion. So Delta Conveyance Project will need this. This is authorized by the State Water Resources Control Board. And through this process, the State Water Resources Control Board will need to make a determination of whether the addition of new North Delta intakes would or would not injure any other legal uses of water or affect water quality or flow standards. The other thing that I would like to highlight in terms of next steps in terms of processes is the Delta Reformed Act under the California Water Code, Section 8522. This is also known as Delta Plan Consistency. So pretty much all major ecosystem and water projects that are considered covered actions are required to certify consistency with the Delta Plan. This is a self-certification process. That's why DWR is one of the approving agencies. So essentially, DWR, when it's time, will certify if the project, the Delta Conveyance Project, as a covered action is consistent with the Delta Plan policies. If there are no appeals, then the project is certified. But if it is appealed, the Delta Stewardship Council will need to make a determination to deny the appeals or to accept the appeals and determine that the project is not consistent with the Delta Plan. So these are some of the processes that are coming up in terms of permitting and environmental compliance. And based off the 2020-22 Delta Science Program's assessment of the Delta ISB, we know that Delta ISB's comments on Delta Conveyance EIRs and EISs are very important and are used by a range of stakeholders to help support or not support these upcoming decision-making processes. So that's just a brief overview, and if there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer them with Lauren.
Well, here's a quick one, Edmund. What would be a good time frame? So there is no deadline for us here. So what should we impose as a deadline on ourselves to have the most impact on these processes?
Yes, I would say right now the timeline hasn't been released publicly in terms of where the targeted stages are. But I would think if a review could be completed or comments completed within a 6-month period, I think that will be timely for different environmental compliance processes. But I would say there is some flexibility because there's so many different processes that comments could inform. But in terms of the 2 big ones that I just highlighted, I think within a 6-month period. But if more time or less time is needed, then that's something that could be discussed, or it's flexible, in other words.
Well, we may learn more as things get scheduled, right? But probably sooner is better than later. And also, when you say 6 months, I think you mean the final public version in 6 months, which means we should aim for a draft version in something more like 4.5 months or something like that. So, so let's think about that. So that's the nice thing. We're not under some 90-day limit here, but we would be looking for folks, to contribute, probably based on your contributions to the EIR review, although that doesn't mean Kenny doesn't have nothing to do. So, so let's hear from folks. Let me just give you just a little bit of my perspective on having read the comments. So ostensibly, we'd be commenting on the degree to which our comments were incorporated. But as many of you know who looked at the comments, a common response to us is CEQA doesn't require that, so what you suggest we didn't do. So that's a pretty unsatisfying answer. And so we would be looking for cases where we recommended science that we thought represented, the best available science for making such determinations, anything that would be critical for adaptive management. Those are the kinds of things that would come up, say, in the Delta Plan assessment of consistency. So with the Delta Plan. So on the one hand, we don't really have to take that head on, but there are these opportunities. If we feel that certain science was ignored, then that would be where we'd go with this. Yeah, I'll turn it open to anyone now. Anna, go ahead.
Yeah, I took a stab at going through the responses yesterday, and I noticed the same thing as you did, Lisa, is that it seemed like there was 2 types of responses. One is we're not required to do this, and 2 was referencing these common responses that that had this numbering, and so I reached out to Edmund, and he was kind enough to send me direct links to each of these common responses. And you know, both the responses to our comments are, I can't remember now, 230 pages or so it's quite lengthy. And then each of these 17 common responses are quite substantial as well. And so, frankly, I'm not sure how deep we can dive in today, but these common responses are grouped by theme and sub area. And so I wonder if organizing ourselves somehow to review these common responses in detail might be a good starting point, because I did not get much out of the responses to our specific comments when I tried to work through them. And I'm not sure if those common responses, Edmund, if everyone has seen those links or not at this point.
Yeah, we sent around the link to the final EIR, but it could be hard to find. But essentially, for the link for the EIR, they're just right here for the common responses.
Chapter 3. Okay. That's good to know. Those were not obvious how to find. Okay. But I did eventually find them. Oh, that's a great suggestion. Yeah, I think, and maybe we want to filter by things that also were high priorities for us. Or maybe we are comprehensive. I tend to think if we have some key messages, we don't have, it may be better not to be comprehensive, but we can discuss that. So just to get people to pay attention to what we think are the priorities. But then again, this is the Delta conveyance plan, or sorry, the Delta plan review is very thorough, and they probably would use anything we would submit. So there's no need to limit ourselves if folks have diverse thoughts on the priorities. So, I mean, the Delta, so here's where Kenny's, having been here before, matters. Kenny, this is a different version of a project you've undoubtedly seen before, but I'm sure some of the same issues have come up, so you won't be a complete stranger to this. And so I think, some of the things that we highlighted that maybe weren't fully addressed were things like how well climate change was addressed, whether the adaptive management plan was realistic in terms of the fish effects. We had many comments along these lines. So I think those could be a theme that we highlight. Tom?
I took a slightly different approach. I didn't have a lot of time, so I just went back and reread the seismicity section that I had commented on in the first draft, and I didn't feel like they had responded to the comment. And the primary one was, what they've done is conflated the Bay Area seismic hazard with the Delta hazard and make it sound like it's worse than we can actually prove it is. There's a lot of uncertainty in the Delta seismic hazard. And I just didn't feel like they had addressed any of that in terms of the revision.
Well, that's good to know, because that was a pretty simple, relatively straightforward comment that could have been addressed. Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess my point is their comment might even be different than what they actually do. So you have to follow up.
Okay, that's good. That's good you did that, and we could certainly take that under advisement when we come up with our response. Obe.
Yeah, I think I had the same understanding or impression that both you and Anna had, that they really didn't address some of the comments or questions that we raised. And very often they would refer to comment number 1 or response number 1 as their response. And I think I was really disappointed to see that response. And I'm not sure if it's going to make any difference at this stage, but we probably should look at them and carefully. I don't know what we can do, frankly.
Well, yeah, that's what some of my setup comments had to do with is, obviously they're going to stick with CEQA. This EIR has been certified. Of course, we haven't seen the EIS yet, so there could be some new content in the EIS. We don't know. But really, I think our opportunity here is to raise issues that go beyond CEQA, that maybe go beyond what the EIR official scope is, if we think that science is necessary to make a good decision. So, and it will get used in this consistency review for the Delta conveyance plan and possibly other uses, so that Edmund described. So yeah, I think we don't want this to be well, we said this and you didn't answer it. It's more of, this issue that you chose not to address is important for these reasons, or something like that, might be the way to go. Inga.
Yeah, I started reading the comments document and quickly got tired of it. And then I actually read the DISB letter from 2017 on the water fix that we got a link for. And just from the big picture things that we have been talking about, the major criticisms of this EIR, that letter sounded kind of like what we're talking about now. So I was wondering if we could focus in on more of the major points that we found lacking in the EIR, and then look for whether they've been fixed or if they've been fixed, and then point those out again in a more general way. I think it would be very tiresome to go through comment by comment. I think that's not a good approach, not very effective. So that's my 2 cents at this point.
Okay, thanks, Inga. Kenny.
Yeah, I just a couple of observations from the past, and that is, I think it's important we document that we were not satisfied with the responses without getting into a lot of details, because these things always have longer life and more iterations than I think than we expect. So I think and Lauren reminded me this of my orientation, that this is one of those things that's cycling around again. And so it's important, not maybe think of more of a chess game of thinking 3-4 moves in advance beyond just this immediate one. And so I think it's important for us to have on record that that some progress was made in addressing the comments, but many critical ones were not addressed, or whatever happened, and maybe highlight a few of the really important ones, so that people will pick that up and it may get used in other ways, not just this immediate response. The only thing I'll say is I'm not surprised by their response. I haven't looked at it closely, but that they have a lot of pressures on them to fulfill certain things, but if we think it's going to come up again, best available science, scientifically defensible approach, they're going to come up again. So I think we have to do something to put it in the record that it was not a satisfactory response. How we go about doing that, I'm not sure without looking at it more closely.
Yeah, Kenny, that's consistent with my thinking, and we can decide later what level of detail we want to get into, but there could be different groups would use different details of our review. So I just want to add that I think, they're not wrong in many cases that CEQA doesn't require certain things, but we had strong feelings about whether, say, the sense of place was being adequately assessed. And, there could be limits to CEQA, and it's not our job to take on CEQA, but we should remember that there are other conditions that should be supporting this decision if we truly have these co-equal goals, is my opinion. So I think that's an opportunity as well. Inga.
Yeah, my comment kind of follows that as well, Lisa. I think their common defense of, well, this is required by CEQA and this is what we do and we don't go beyond that. Maybe we need to question that. I mean, time has passed since CEQA was established, right? How much? 50, 60 years? 50 at least. So maybe go beyond that, and that's why there is a Delta plan, right? Which includes climate change and the effects and all that. maybe just go there and say, you know, it's just not, it might be enough as a step in moving forward with the process, but it's just not enough in terms of assessing the impact of this project on the environment for the long term. So
and the social systems, yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think that's a good point. Yeah. Well, I think they're all good points. Tanya, what do you want to say?
Yeah, I like everything that's been said, and I appreciate how you've been framing this, Lisa, because I think that helps us kind of get our heads wrapped around what we might need to do for a process here. And I think to Inga's previous point, focusing on some of the major comments that we had would be a good starting place. But I also like when Tom raised that, you know, he dug back into one of those comments that he made on a specific chapter that he felt was important. I think we could do a little bit of both, where, you know, we go back to the chapters that each of us worked on in our subgroups to review and you know, or that we focused on individually, and pull out any comments that we thought were really important at the time and go back and just check those, at least to make sure that we're not missing something. Because if we do just focus on the major comments, there might be something like Tom brought up that could be really valuable for informing this next stage. And we put a lot of time into this review. And, you know, I do think it's worth us kind of spending some time to go through and make sure that we elevate those things that seem to have been lost in the response. So.
Yeah, I think we should maybe take that on as a case-by-case basis. I agree. And I mean, so in some cases, they're just right that what we bring up isn't related to CEQA. But I think the case that Tom brought up is, did they really use the best available science and apply it appropriately? Maybe there are no equivalent seismic studies for Sacramento, which is why they use the Bay. But if you're going to transfer that, you need the right caveats at a minimum, right? So I think I think I do see a place for, and here's where the science maybe is inadequate or maybe isn't best practices, and then yeah, there's other things that need to be considered. This might be two ways to think of it. Yeah, Obing.
Yeah, I agree with Kenny. I think we should provide some, response for the record that we are not satisfied in places where we are not. But I also think, besides what Tom raised, sometimes I felt like they did not understand the issue we raised, or maybe they responded to the wrong, question that we asked, particularly with climate change issue in a couple of places. Something we need to probably highlight, maybe not going into details, but maybe they didn't follow what we were asking. I don't think our comments were unclear, but we worked on it a lot, over time. So, anyway.
Yeah, I think that's really consistent with what I was just saying too. Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Diane.
I wanted to comment, and I support doing something now, as Kenny said, and you have said it, and looking at the list that of other areas where there will be reviews, it seems that water quality and endangered species will be two issues that will come up, but in terms of other review processes or signing off on this. And that's something we can, again, similar to what Tom said, go back and potentially be a little bit more detailed about some issues, because there's vulnerabilities to water supplies that were sort of glossed over, if I remember correctly. Public water supplies that are going to be issues coming up down the road if given this list that that we saw.
Yeah, and I'm still disappointed as an economist that I still haven't seen cost benefit analysis, because yeah, sure, any project will impose some harms. The question is, are those harms justified by the benefits? And without you know, a more comprehensive cost benefit analysis, it's hard for anyone to make that determination. So we haven't seen the EIS yet, though, the final EIS. So, but it didn't seem as if that was in the scope from what we could tell. Okay, so it seems that we are generally dissatisfied and we would like to put something in writing. So I guess we're going to need to get organized here. If someone would like to lead beside me, that would be great. If not, I will lead. And I think, in general, we want to try to find, reallocate back to folks which chapters they looked at. We don't have Jay anymore, who did a lot of the water supply review, but we have Obey, who has much of the same expertise. So, but I think we may need to, because of our lost knowledge of why we said certain comments, we may need to pitch in a little bit on some chapters that maybe we were peripheral on to help out the new, folks with that weren't here through the whole process. So, but if everyone could just start thinking about the stuff that they put the most effort into and what they might like to bring forward, I think that would be a good start. We need some kind of timeline upon, on which to do this. I know a lot of folks are really wrapped up in trying to finish the reviews at this point. So, as time allows, people can start individually putting together some thoughts. Take a look, if you haven't already, at the last letter that the water fix, the final EIR that we reviewed is a good model. And I think we can try to move forward. Anna?
I'm curious if we can get any additional guidance on what style of input is likely to be most impactful, if at all. So for example, would it be more effective for us to write a very, brief, I don't know, let's say 2-page document that basically says, in general, we find the responses disappointing. This really doesn't address the issues. Or is it worthwhile or more effective for us to really, go back through in detail? And I'm not sure who could provide that input to us, whether formally or informally, but I could see this task that we're taking on, taking a number of different forms that would have vastly different amounts of effort required. And so especially if we're considering something that would be a substantial amount of effort, if there's any way that we can get confirmation that that is the most effective way. And I see Lauren's got her hand raised. I suspect she knows much more than the rest of us.
Yes, go ahead, Lauren.
Yeah, from my awareness of these other processes, I think general statements are probably have less impact than more specific examples that you might be able to provide and point out. Just because Tom brought it up, the one about the seismic comment is an example, but yeah.
Yeah, and I've been trying to think about this too, Anna. So yeah, I feel the same way as you. We want to use our time efficiently, but apparently it isn't completely straightforward. So anything that might come up in the Delta Plan consistency review, it's valid commenting on. I think, as Kenny pointed out, these things have lives of their own and iterations that we can't foresee at this point. So even though I would tend to think DWR is not an audience for this, it could be, as they're working on their operational plans in the future, they look back to these points in terms of, improving the science. So I want to do the same thing as you. I want to screen or prioritize, but the answer I'm really seeing when I look at the scope here is that probably we should be as thorough as we can be, as much as time permits. So I don't know, Kenny's making a face. I welcome dissenting views, but this is, I've been trying to feel out this landscape, and the thing is there are different audiences, so different needs. Go ahead, Kenny.
I guess, and it's not as jaded as it sounds. I don't think we're writing for DWR.
Yeah.
In our response, we're writing to others about that, and maybe that helps with how you frame it. I don't think we're going to convince them of much. So but it's important that it be on record that this is what happened, I think, right? And that others may view it. So, but maybe they will. I hate to be on day 2 already jaded. That seems premature, but they're on a path as well, right? And they're
Right.
going.
And they're
So
still going to keep following SEQA. Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to imply that we were going to dramatically change, but like in terms of these more specific comments about ways that climate change might be considered or something like that, I think, again, that can be put, that's part of the Delta plan to consider climate change. So it goes there for sure, but maybe it also eventually influences, things at
Right.
DWR. But yeah, they're not our primary audience. I agree. And I didn't mean to imply. Yeah. Okay, does anyone want to volunteer to lead this? I'll let you think about it if you, I don't know, Obe, was that a hand? Was that a hand?
No. I'll contribute to the climate change stuff that I review.
Okay, well, maybe with staff support to keep us organized, we can all be co-leaders of this. Yeah, Tanya.
Well, that was going to be my suggestion, that I think it's a very daunting assignment to think about leading this particular review, especially since a lot of us only read, certain chapters and not others, or we may not be as familiar with the whole. So I think focusing on the sections that we did review and going back to some of those comments and then trying to trace back to see if there's areas that were missed. Maybe we could come up with some kind of common guidance for that process, for how we might do that efficiently and effectively. And then to kind of send us on our way and then come back as a group and talk about those things and see how they bubble up into some common themes. I don't know. That works.
Yeah, that might be maybe harkening back to Anna's suggestion that we look at those common responses first and see if those are the same themes that we might choose. Maybe we can plan to talk about that in our next meeting in February.
Some of the common responses do line up with themes that we had. I don't think it's always a one-to-one correspondence, but certainly in many cases it is. I think the other challenge is that a few of us, I guess, especially Inga and I, had just joined as the rest of the ISB were wrapping this up. And so even for some of us who are still here, I don't think we have quite as broad of a view of the overall report. But I think what Tanya's suggesting works well. And Inga and I primarily focus on the water quality, but Obe, I'm happy to take a look at the climate pieces as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I do think it might not be the best use of our time to go with a fine-tooth comb to see if everything was addressed. But if we want to pick the science that we think is most relevant to making good decisions and looking for those might be the flow we could think about doing. So let's why don't we start with that? Yeah. Obe, did you want to make a comment?
Yeah. I just want to, I think we need to highlight this CEQA issue regardless. It might not matter, but I think that should be identified separately because that might be for a bigger audience. But I also think that we did a lot of analysis. It almost seems like they didn't mean anything to those who reviewed it. But I think we need to highlight this climate change scenario approach they use and how, it might not address some of the future issues. So I think some of those might be for other audiences, not just DWR.
Right, and it's pretty consistent with some of our DMDU work too, but right.
Right.
So the CEQA only required them to analyze out to 2040,
Right.
but as we pointed out, the project is intended to last a lot longer than that.
Right.
And
Exactly.
and they only looked at extreme climate change scenario for flooding impacts only, not other things. So so yeah, that was a key finding, and I think we clearly want to emphasize that. So with that in mind, let's think about that kind of thing. Inga.
Yeah, I also want to point again to the 2017 comment letter regarding the water fix and how similar. I mean, it just reminded me that when Anna and I came in, you know, there was the big discussion that Jay and Steve had about the table that they wanted to see and it being much more easily readable and understandable what the different options were providing and what the differences were. And I mean, that was already there in 2017, one of their major points of criticism, and the inclusion of climate change. I think it could also, you know, I mean, I don't know how many times you have to do this or say this to improve things. I also agree they're probably not going to change anything because, well, what they are going by is CEQA and that's the law. So, but it could be, you know, part of the general criticism, you might call it, that that these things are important and that they have been pointed out again and again. And, you know, I don't have the solution of how this can be addressed and how this can be improved, but it was startling to me to see many of the same issues in that 6-year-old letter. So that's all I'm saying.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good point. You know, yes, if they did, if somebody really wanted to change CEQA, it'd probably take decades. But if we think there are aspects that really it's inadequate, there is a conversation. I mean, certainly there are groups that are having this conversation of how does CEQA need to change. So I think we could say what we want to say, but that probably shouldn't be our primary concern. Just because of that long lag time, most of us will be in the ground before anything changes. So, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't try, right? That doesn't mean we shouldn't make important comments. Yeah, Tom. Tom, you're on mute.
When Inga was making her comment, it got me thinking long term, and a whole nother approach we might consider in terms of the problem of being ignored and address that challenge. If you look at what's going on here, what happened was when the California water system was initially built, there were plans to have a conveyance structure in there of some kind. And they haven't been able to achieve that for political reasons. And there's a whole history of efforts to construct things. And it might be better in terms of this long-term challenge to address that in a letter, because it has such a big impact on how the Delta operates. When you stop to think about it, on our field trip, we looked at the 15 million fish a year that are trucked from one end of the Delta to the other. And either we're going to continue to do that or we're going to build a conveyance structure. And right now it looks like we're going to build a conveyance structure. So I guess what I'm saying is maybe to address that that challenge of being ignored and the defects in the system, a reflective letter might actually have more impact than just as a group we sat down and asked ourselves, does California really need a conveyance structure?
I don't know, Tom, that sounds above our pay grade, honestly. You know, our job is, did they use the right science to make those opinions? I think that we may be edging into a political debate that for which we are not particularly well suited. You know, our job is the right science being used to support decisions? And so, you know, I think we have to be very careful to stay in that lane so that our science is always seen as objective and without a political agenda. So
my concern is if we stay in that lane, they'll just choose to ignore us.
Always their prerogative. Yeah. Diane, what did you want to add?
So I'm responding to Tom's comment. My recollection, my understanding is that this conveyance structure is not going to become subsume the removal of water where the fish are being captured, but it's for these high flows, at certain times, but it's not addressing that need to capture the fish and try to redistribute them from the delta. I mean, there is concern that will be used for that way in the future once it's built. Am I right about that?
This is
I
where we
don't
need
remember
Steve.
that detail. That's a pretty important aspect. Yeah.
Maybe when we go to public comment, someone will answer your question. Did you have another comment, Diane?
No, I have no other comments. And again, I apologize if I'm misremembering.
Yeah, it's tricky. These things are tricky, and there's a lot of if this, then that. Anna.
I just wanted to reinforce what you were saying, Lisa, in response to Tom's comments earlier. I think it's very important that as the ISB, we limit our comments to the scientific aspects. As private citizens, we may have opinions about the conveyance project, but I think our role here is pretty well defined.
Yeah, it's a tight balance, but I think that, for us to be seen as objective members, it's important that we're really just looking at the quality of the science. But I think we have plenty to say there. So, and again, and also to Inga's last comments, the information is not being presented in a way that makes the trade-offs clear. And I think we've said that, and we could say it again. Yeah. So, Inga.
Yeah, what Tom just said kind of falls under the cost benefit analysis, right, that you are requesting. I think the facts need to be presented in a way that people can understand, so good decisions can be made, whichever decision will be made, and that's how I see my role, to point out what the deficiencies are in this assessment of the environmental consequences of the structure, right? So, and that's all I want, really. I want all the facts to be on the table so people can make an educated decision. That's as simple as that. So.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, Tom. You're muted. You're muted.
Sorry, I have a dog here that I have to be careful about. I think Diane's comment was, or memory was correct, because there are periods when they're not pumping any water at the proposed diversion thing, and I would imagine they're going to be pumping water around the whole course of the year. So the fish will continue to be trucked.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, one last comment on this. It seems like we have two types of comments here. One is that, maybe there are some things they didn't either understand, or maybe they're likely to address our comments, which I felt like they didn't address many of them. But the other types of comments are, and we don't have to be constrained by CEQA or anything else. Our science input should look at more broadly. I think those are the types of comments that would go to other audiences that eventually might lead to some changes in the way they are reviewing projects, So that's what I wanted to suggest. I
think that's exactly right. Yeah, I think it's a very nice summary, Obey. So you've ended us on a good note. And then let's also keep in mind what Lauren said, that specific comments are better than general comments. So even though I do really like that 2017 letter, and I like how a lot of things were worded, I also think a way to build on that is to be more specific about, if you could only add one thing, or, this is probably very important to understand the risks thoroughly, or, things. I think especially if we say why we think these analyses are needed, I think it's more impactful than just saying, well, you should have done this, you should have done this, so I think that could be a way to make that letter even better, a newer version of that letter even better. Okay, so let's I'll just go ahead and say I'll lead this, keep things coordinated. I'll work with staff so that we get the right reminders and the right deadlines. But let's do plan on having a conversation about, how we want to set priorities or do the structure. If folks could take a look at the sections they looked at. Kenny, you didn't look at any sections, but you know which sections your expertise is relevant to. Let's move on from there. All right, so with that, I'll bring this to an end, but let's check if there are any public comments.
There are no public comments, but I just want to revisit the follow-up item of having ISB members review the sections that they helped draft. Do you guys want everyone to have everything reviewed by February, or is there a different timeline you want to go on? Or by the February ISB meeting?
Yeah, I think, some people, really did a lot of work. So if they can get it done by February, great. The February meeting is a month away. Let's aim for that. And then folks can always take more time. But yeah, if folks could try, and again, if you don't have time to be thorough, be strategic about which comments you think were the most key of what you said, and see how well those were addressed. So yeah, why don't we set that as the standard by February? Review whether your highest priority comments were addressed at a minimum, if not all your comments. And I will note, I mean, in fairness to DWR, there were some comments that did turn out that they had been addressed deep in the appendices, and we missed it because there were tens of thousands of pages to look at. So we should also drop some things. I think, I noticed at least one thing that we should drop because they had addressed it. It just was hard to find. So keep that in mind. Okay, Kenny.
Possible to find anything good to start off the response with? Did they address things?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's an important question. You're saying something that I often said in the initial letter, which was they did a very nice job modeling a lot of these effects, and it's a very high quality EIR, and we should give them props for that. But yeah, right. I guess we should say, I don't know if that's really our job. We did say some positive things in the initial review, just so you know.
Yeah, well, this is a response to revisions, so maybe you don't need to. Maybe it's.
I guess it depends on that. If people saw any substantive changes. I think generally what we're hearing is even when something was relatively easy to address, it doesn't seem like they did in terms of science gaps or science tweaks. In our small data set so far. So we need to take a broader view and make sure that's true. But that may be why we have less positive things to say. But yeah, they obviously have to model a lot of impacts, and really they've done an excellent job pulling together a lot of data and modeling. And so we shouldn't lose sight of that. Thank you for that reminder. Okay, so all right. So any public comments, Edmund?
There are none.
Okay. So we will try to work with that deadline of February. We'll start working this into the work plan for the ISB. We'll make sure this is a product. It sounds like we have consensus that we want this to be a product. So, okay, so we have now earned a break. So let's come back at 5 after the hour, wherever you are. And then we'll move into agenda item 6, which is a brief update on the decision-making under deep uncertainty review. All right, see you soon.
Lisa, we are now at 11:10. Would you like to resume?
Yes, let's get started.
We are ready to begin.
Oh, thanks. I know I was waiting for something. Okay, I call the meeting back to order. Let's dive in. Now we get to our section of the agenda that's going through the various reviews. And we're starting with the decision-making under deep uncertainty, and I'll keep this pretty brief. The Delta ISB finalized the DMDU prospectus, and we've been hosting a seminar series and conducting an inventory and analysis of scenario planning in the region. So just a quick overview on the inventory and analysis of scenario planning. Reminder that the goal is just to see what kind of techniques are being used and what kind of scopes have been evaluated. And so last time I checked, all the reports that we had been coded, and we'll be moving forward with interviews. And the purpose of those interviews is to fill gaps in what we learned from the reports. So the reports may not include all the information that we're interested in. So it's a information filling exercise. And of course, we're paying particular attention to how future uncertainty and perspectives of diverse interested parties are being incorporated. As you know, tomorrow we have the next seminar in our series. So that's January 18th. Well, we think this is the final seminar, but I think we reserve the right to change our mind at a future date. But probably the final seminar. And our fifth speaker is very esteemed, I'm not going to say her name right, Marlyn Hasnoot, Associate Professor at Utrecht University and a climate change researcher at Deltares. And she has some folks with her. The original folks posted online are not the same ones, but they will be incorporating, the person who's joining us will be covering the same information that Karen and Catherine were supposed to cover. And what's nice about this seminar is that it's going to explore the practical examples of using dynamic adaptive planning to show when it's most effective and how it can be used to reframe uncertainty as an opportunity for promoting resilience. And Dr. Hasnoot is really, wrote the methods for this technique, and it's been adopted by governments around the world. And really, it's exciting opportunity. Okay, now I'm going to turn it over to Obe. He attended the 2023 Decision Making Under Deep Uncertainty Society from October 30th to November 1st, where he presented an overview of the DMDU review work. And he's going to tell us what he took away from that experience. Obe.
Can you see my screen? Not yet?
Oh, Kyra's going to share your screen for you, Obe, so you can just do next slide.
Okay. I have a new version, but that's okay. Yeah. Okay, let me give you. How about now? Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Do you see the full screen or not?
You need to go.
Go ahead, Evan.
You need to go to slideshow. If you go to the upper, go to the top under slideshow.
Okay. Do you see it now? No.
No.
Sorry,
No, it's not in presentation mode.
Yeah, give me 1 second. Let me try to reshare it. Okay. Sorry about this. Okay. Oh, 1 minute. Okay. How about now?
Under display settings, if you go to display settings that we see the black on top. You just want to make sure you duplicate your screen. So we're seeing the note screen right now. If you go to display settings on top.
Okay. Okay.
Just click duplicate screen.
Okay, give me 1 second. Oh, I'm still. Why is this? Display settings. I'm not seeing it.
Maybe we should go back to having Kyra share.
So at the top left of your screen, there's the show taskbar. Right next to it is display settings.
Okay. And
If you move the mouse to the right.
yeah. Okay. Yeah, I did see it, but okay. So where is the?
Oh wait, I have your updated slides.
Okay,
that you
go
sent,
ahead. Yeah,
so
yeah,
I can share them.
Yeah, go ahead. And I think that would be good.
Okay.
Sorry about this. I always have trouble with this. Yeah, I make it short. I know we don't have a whole lot of time. I was asked to give an update on my visit to Delta on this at the DMDU conference. So if you can move to the next slide. So this is a very short report. I know we have some folks who were not involved in the development of this talk and presentation. So I presented this our Bay Delta DMDU study at the decision making under deep uncertainty conference in Delft, the Netherlands, from October 31 to November 1st. The theme of that conference was called Decade of DMDU, Learning from the Past and Looking into the Future. And they have had these DMDU conferences for about 10 years. So this is like the 10th year. And I've been to one or two of them. And actually, it was well attended from folks all over the world, about over 100, and practitioners and academics. And I learned a new term called pracademics. Both included practitioners and academics working on DMDU. The presentation that we made was on the practice of scenario analysis in the context of decision making under deep uncertainty. Next slide, please. So this is the title slide. Didn't come out very well. That's okay. It was jointly developed by some members of the ISB, Lisa Ranger, Tanya Haikala, and also Kyra Wallace, who is the California Sea Grant State Fellow. And we put this together. Basically, the idea was to discuss the practice of scenario analysis of large systems in the context of DMDU with applications in Sacramento, San Joaquin, Delta. One of the things that we want to emphasize was there aren't very many examples of large systems like the Bay Delta, so we want to highlight and get some feedback on that. Next slide, please. I'll be happy to share the presentation with everybody and also the abstracts of the conferences. I have a copy of that. And so in the presentation, I highlighted the sources of deep uncertainty, sea level rise, flooding, climate change, drought, levee failures, salinity, and so forth, things that we have been talking about, and presented the approach that Lisa mentioned, the seminar series, and also the inventory and analysis to see how scenarios are being used in Delta. Also talked about the findings to date, primarily the need for collaboration across agencies and stakeholder engagement in dealing with uncertainties, and identified the potential barriers, particularly emphasizing cognitive biases, reluctance to discuss harmful extreme futures, and sometimes overconfidence in what is known and framing of future changes. Next slide, please. So I'm identifying here some key themes or issues that were identified at the conference. There were several nice keynote presenters. One of them was an IPCC author, and she made a very nice presentation. And I have a copy of that if you're interested. Basically, they emphasize the importance of acting in the face of deep uncertainty, particularly because the climate change may be happening faster than what was anticipated. For example, the overshooting of 1.5 degrees would potentially lead to irreversible changes, and the idea is you need to act before that. The other theme that came out was that many systems have similar situations where we have multiple sectors and multiple risks that are being faced and making it very complex. And as I mentioned earlier, we don't want to wait until the uncertainties are solved, as it may leave little or no time to adapt. And it was identified, well, many people commented that it's very challenging for the decision makers to choose options when the future is highly uncertain, particularly those what are known as low likelihood, high impact scenarios. Next slide, please. So there was also a lot of discussion that there's a lot of theory, but there's a research gap in terms of actually implementing the DMDU approaches. And someone made the Einstein's comment that in theory, practice and theory are the same, but in practice they are not. So there is a gap in implementing, and that was identified. And there were several approaches that were suggested, low regret options emphasizing co-benefits, adaptation pathways like the one DAP approach that we'll be discussing tomorrow. And one thing that was emphasized is that, you know, when you have an adaptive pathway, some of those short-term decisions may actually make changes to the system, or the society may respond differently. That may itself have an impact on the final outcome, and emphasize the look for societal feasibility of pathways, keeping options open clearly, and then use the climate resilient pathways. The importance of stakeholder engagement for transformative adaptation was recognized, and particularly the keynote speakers highlighted the use of storylines and scenarios and how they can help promote buy-in, stakeholder engagement, joint development of pathways, stress testing, and also emphasize the justice, equity, and inclusion. Next slide. So this is my last slide. I added this yesterday. There's a new chapter in Fifth National Climate Assessment that might be of importance to us. Particularly, this chapter deals with complex systems, and there are some key messages that I think might be useful for our work. The messages suggested that the human nature interconnected create unexpected opportunities. The complex impacts and responses further burden frontline communities, and collaboration among diverse knowledge holders will improve the responses to complex climate challenges. And then finally, the new governance approaches are emerging, particularly approaches like DAP, but gaps in practice and evidence persists. So similar to what we heard at the conference. And that's all I have. And I'll be happy to share the presentation, the abstract, and also the keynote from one of the speakers that I was able to get. That's all I have.
That's very nice, Obey. Thank you. And you know, you're keeping this general and you're saying generalities, but you know, those of us who are working in this area know that these have very specific, you know, implementation issues associated with them. So I hope folks understand that this is not a fully academic exercise. These are real things. Like you know, for example, if you need to adapt, you can have, you know, only the government agencies try to figure out the plan, or you can work with everyone, you know, crowdsource it to a broad and diverse stakeholders who can give you great insights about what lowers the burden of adaptation and things like that. So there's a lot of realism behind these general statements. Any questions or comments? Okay, well, with that, I'm going to check and see if we have any public comments.
There are none.
Okay, great. So we'll move on to agenda item 7, a discussion of the subsidence review. And Tom, you're up.
All righty. We're chugging along. Where we are right now is we've, and that's primarily Christine has written summaries of the presentations. They're like 1 to 2 page summaries, and the subsequent discussion for each of the panels that we had at the subsidence workshop. And that's really the body of the review. That'll be the most pages. And what we're doing now is Diane, Tanya, and I are going through and trying to identify potential recommendations and findings first, and then recommendations for the report. And we've begun that. We have drafts, and what we're going to have to do is combine them now into one set of recommendations, and maybe prioritize them to some extent. And then the only major thing left to write will be the introduction to the report. We've already drafted the problem statement, but we'll have to write an introduction. And I'm hoping by March we'll have all of those pieces ready for everyone to look at it. It'll clearly be a draft at that point, but I think the schedule that we have is fairly realistic, and we should be able to meet the March deadline for having a draft of the report. It's going to require spending a fair amount of time on it for the three of us before then, but I think it's doable, and that's where we are.
Oh, that sounds good, Tom. Diane, did you want to add anything to that? You were also heavily involved.
No, I don't have anything to add to that. Again, I think, as Tom said, we're at the point of his taking the lead and merging the different recommendations that came from the three different panels into a more holistic whole. But yeah, I'm very, I think there's not a conflict or challenges, and well, it'll take some time, but I can see how that can happen.
Great, and I didn't mean to leave you out, Tanya. Tanya, did you want to add anything? No, okay, she's good.
And I should add one thing. We're really going to miss Christine, because she has been so instrumental in keeping us on track and arranging things for us, and actually writing a lot of the material. So she will be missed.
Indeed.
I would also say that I was particularly glad to see how the sort of the biogeochemistry panel and the issues of identifying carbon sequestration and how that fits into carbon budgets. I think that's really going to come together in a way that will be particularly useful as these issues go forward. And I don't, Tanya, I see you nodding your head. I was, at the very beginning, there was some concern that the biogeochemistry and the importance of CO2 and methane and N2O would sort of be just this isolated topic, but I think it will integrate well into the final report. And so part of our keeping that in mind, we can try to make that section particularly accessible.
Sounds good. And I do know Christine was helpful in connecting some of those dots. So that's by looking up, say, the carbon crediting protocols and things like that. So we do appreciate that. Okay, well, do we have any questions or comments from the board on this one? And if not, I'll ask Edmund if we have any public comments.
There are none.
Great. Okay, so we'll move on to our third and final review for today, item number 8, the food webs review. And Diane's going to kick this off.
Thank you, Lisa. And I'm really glad that Bob is also here to add comment. Again, this was a effective workshop and great progress has been made on the report. Where we're addressing both the findings and the recommendations. I think there's still some work to do on the recommendations, but the findings are pretty strong. One of the ways in which this report is distinct is that the workshop was structured in a way to learn about the applications and the types of models that have been used in other large systems that are comparable in scale to the Delta. And so there's some text prepared on those examples that were developed from the very excellent presentations, and those are going to be boxes in the report. And I think that's a strong aspect of the report. The overall important finding was related to this need for connections between the long-term management goals or objectives and the development or integration of existing models, possibly into a large or comprehensive unified model, but that this connection between the models and application would be is going to be a major theme of the report. And one of the other strengths of the report will be that a sort of in-depth explanation of which type of model or framework for a model helps with a particular management question. And I think we have a plan to for Edmund to share a screen to show this table that we have now in our report. Is Edmund, is that correct? And as you can see here, we have model types and data requirements and benefits. We might change the word drawback to be a little bit less negative. And then this column on the right is applications for the Delta with examples. And Bob has proposed we want to break this, breaking this down into two different tables, where this second table that doesn't quite exist yet really addresses that applications topic. So again, we envision having sufficient detail to help with explaining how different models can be used. And then in our report, we also highlight a range of applications where models will be effective. And so one of our recommendations is to link food web models to management questions and actions using an adaptive framework, which was brilliantly conveyed in a talk given by Ryan Belmore. And then a recommendation having to do with how to develop a comprehensive coordination and an implementation plan. So that's my overview. Bob, do you want to chime in here? I hope it's okay to share this table.
Well, nice overview, Diane. I don't have much to add. I didn't expect to be here today, so I'm not as prepared as I should be, I guess. But Diane, I thought you did a really nice job providing that overview. Where we are right now is sometime in the next couple of weeks, Lillian will be preparing the next version of this. Hopefully it won't take terribly long for her to kind of pull all some missing pieces, or the pieces are there. We just need to pull them into the draft report so we can see the entire document at one time. And then I was going to take it from there for the next week or two and really go through it carefully to make sure that the recommendations are fully supported by the information that's in the appendices, that the document essentially becomes seamless, that we have recommendations and conclusions that follow logically and completely supported by our interviews with the community and what we heard at the workshop. And then my hope is that we will have something that we can share with the rest of the board in time for our next meeting in February. So that's my hope. I guess it's all of our hope, is that, that we can move ahead expeditiously like this. And so we'll see what happens. The next few weeks will be action-packed, but behind the scenes action-packed as we try and pull a good document together for you to comment on.
Oh, that's a great update. Appreciate all that info. And I'm just going to add my 2 cents. I've been a little bit involved in helping plan this workshop, not nearly as much as Diane and Bob and Steve. And Bob, thank you for doing that of synthesizing and editing the final report or current draft. The other thing that I found useful about the workshop was, I think there's some concern that taking on this task would require too much data, too many resources. It would be very expensive. And so I liked that the workshop covered a range of model complexities. And also I learned a lot about techniques that are being used to lower the cost of data collection. So I just thought that was kind of my economist ear hears these things. We also want to, perhaps give Kenny Rose a chance to look at this in some depth, since he has a lot of expertise in this area of modeling fish populations. So I don't know how you want to work that into your workflow or what Kenny has time to do, but just something to put on the list of things to consider.
Well, Lisa, I think that's an important suggestion. And in my mind, I hadn't really articulated it to everyone, but in my mind was I was going to try and pull the document together so that it's in pretty darn good shape, and then show it to Kenny for his response to it. I hope that's okay. I hope that works within the DISB, regulations and guidelines and so forth. But do that. And we should also say throughout kudos to Steve Brandt is that he really pulled a lot of this together in this last week or two as a board member and getting the draft as far along as it is. So it's greatly appreciated, the work that he did to get it this far.
Well, then I know we're really focused on praising Christine because this is her last meeting, but let's not forget the really large amount of work that Lillian did to pull together resources and assist Steve in developing themes and things like that. So yeah, with a lot of help from Lillian and Christine too. But okay, any other board members want to comment about this or have any questions? Okay, hearing none. Do we have any public comments?
There were none.
Okay, moving on to agenda item 9, preparation for upcoming meetings. So we have a meeting scheduled for February 21st. We will be hopefully discussing this new Food Web's review draft. If all goes well, if not, we'll push it to March. March is already the subsidence review time, so it would be nice if we could get something in February. Doesn't have to be perfect, but we'll get reviews. We'll get updates on all the reviews in February, and we will hear from the Delta lead scientist and we'll get a council executive order report. And then on February 22nd, we have the Delta lead scientist interview panel meeting. So that'll be a chance for us to meet one of the candidates. And so that's and of course, March and April agendas are still being developed. So we'll talk about those in the future. But at this point, I do want to acknowledge that this is Christine Kabugo's last meeting, and we didn't let her say anything earlier when we were all praising her. So I just want to give her a little chance to respond. I waited till the end because I knew you were going to get more praise during the review discussion. So yeah, Christine, we're sorry to see you go. Do you have any parting words for us?
Sure. I am coming back in March, and this is not my last day, so I'll be around for another month. But I did just want to say thank you so much for the kind words. I've truly enjoyed working with all of you, and I hope I've been vocal about that during our in-person meetings as well, when we've had dinners. But I did just want to thank all the mentorship that I've received, the opportunities that Lisa has mentioned to spread around and kind of experience different fields has been instrumental to make me a much better interdisciplinary scientist than I would be otherwise. And as you'll hear in March, the responsibilities I've had with the board were very instrumental in making me such an attractive candidate to the Nature Conservancy. And that's something I'm happy to talk about in one more extended presentation. But I do want to thank the board for providing such a supportive environment for early career scientists to really broaden their horizons. And I've truly enjoyed my work here. Thank you.
Thanks, Christine. We look forward to hearing more in March. Okay, do we have any public comments? Oh, no, yeah, do we have any public comments on this part?
There are none.
All right, so let's move on to agenda item 10, review of items for follow-up.
Yeah, so today, various ISB members, Obey, Dr. Nyman, Dr. Rose, and Dr. Warner made various disclosures. We'll be updating our disclosure page with that information. Today, the Delta ISB provided feedback on some of the accomplishments to report. Dr. Wanger will use that information to help inform her update to the Delta Stewardship Council at their public meeting later this month. During the chair's report, Dr. Wanger also mentioned that the Delta ISB is looking to elect the new chair-elect. If anyone is interested, please let staff know or reach out to Lisa if you want more information about what the position entails. The new chair-elect will begin September 1st of this year when Inga becomes chair and Dr. Wanger becomes past chair. For the Bay Delta Plan staff report, today, Dr. Heikala made a motion with a second from Dr. Werner to adopt the draft letter for submittal to the State Water Resources Control Board with the agreed upon modification to the sentence we strongly recommend. Dr. Wanger will make that edit as discussed today, and then it'll be submitted to the State Water Resources Control Board by January 19th. And for the subsidence and food webs review, the review leads are working to develop a public draft. The current targets for those drafts will be possibly February for food webs and between March and April for subsidence. Today, for decision-making under deep uncertainty, Obey provided an update at the conference he attended, and he offered to share presentation materials and any abstracts. So if anyone's interested, feel free to reach out to staff and we'll connect you with the materials. And then the big item for today is the Delta Conveyance Project EIR. So based on discussion today, the Delta ISB will be drafting a memo in response to the final EIR before the February meeting. The idea is that individual Delta ISB members should review DWR's responses to your comments and then be prepared to discuss anything that you would like to highlight in response to DWR. In addition to for shortcomings, also think about things that you want to highlight or things that you think were addressed well. Does anyone want to edit or provide additional guidance on that?
That was great, Edmund. I would like to add just a little bit to the DCP review instructions. So I think we had this nice conversation about how there were two buckets of comments. So the sort of what are some broader issues beyond CEQA that the science could inform well that isn't well covered under CEQA. Sort of we don't have to get into whether it's should be in CEQA. We could just say these are also important decision criteria based on the science, and then the second type was more specific. Here was a science issue I brought up that wasn't addressed. So let's try to organize it that way. And also, I think we talked about the need to talk about process next time. So if while you're looking at your comments and maybe reviewing the last the 2017 letter, if you want to think about that process, we'll probably propose something, but we'd love to get as much input as we can on what would make this an efficient and effective process. Okay.
Process in terms of CEQA?
Yeah.
Okay, just being clear, thank you.
No. You mean the process in terms of CEQA, or are you talking about the bucket one comments?
Oh no, like the process for what?
The process of how we want to organize our comments and what we want to prioritize for the letter.
All right. Yeah, I got it now. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll probably propose something as a straw dog that we can talk about. So that is the last agenda item. Well, no, first we need to see if there are public comments on this agenda item.
There are none.
Great. So now we move on to agenda item 11, which is any public comments for matters that are not on the agenda.
There are none.
And with that, I now adjourn this January ISB meeting. Thank you all.